Hello and welcome to Mapping the Master Plan. I'm Tom Bott, I'm the town planner here in Kingston, Mass. In our continuing series of stories about the master plan, today we're talking about historic preservation. I have my two guests with me today, Chris Hofmann, who is, from what I understand from the internet, and it's on the internet, it must be true, an expert demo guy for colonial saw. And one of the few people in Kingston who has and would eat a fractured prune.
That's right, we did talk about donuts.
They are these exquisite donuts from the Maryland area. Fabulous stuff. Chris is a true artisan with wood from the pictures I've seen, some of the exquisite work he's done with Hofmann Joinery. And I know this isn't the economic development show, but I'd love to hear a little bit about colonial saw. Really a very impressive business we have in Kingston that very few people probably know about.
It's kind of hidden in plain sight.
It is. And Chris is a member of the Historic Commission. He's on the Master Plan Committee. He's on the Community Preservation Committee and has an extensive traveling schedule. And he is a trooper with stepping up to help out his community in spite of the fact that he's got so many things that he has to do. My other guest, some of you may recognize, is Frances Botelho-Hoeg. She is a retired elementary school principal,
right.
A former town moderator, a one-time contestant on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Correct.
In 2005, she won the Pop Search competition.
Correct.
To sing with the Boston Pops on the 4th of July at the Esplanade in front of about 500,000-ish or so people.
600,000 that
600,000, so don't be intimidated by our 7
I'm
viewing.
not.
It's about how many people are watching today.
Right, I'm ready. I can handle it.
So Fran sang at the Pops. She's currently a member of the Wage and Personnel Board on the Historic Committee, along with Christian, and her husband Walter, also a member, who recently stepped down from the local Historic District Study Committee, which we might want to touch base on today.
Right.
And as you know, for you longtime viewers, we usually start our show off with one of our guests singing a song. So,
Fran,
Chris,
take it away.
Chris, what do you got for us today?
I can have Old Lang Syne. Let's dig a little deeper.
So, in the master plan, the historic resources are under the cultural and natural resource section. And we talk a lot about those things that we have and those things that we would like to preserve. And we've lost a few things in the meantime. We darn near lost the old town hall.
Almost.
The Maple Avenue School is gone, which is quite a story.
It was a hard-fought fight.
And in our show, we don't really have time to get into all the particulars about that. But from the economic or from the historic preservation perspective, we're looking at what sort of resources do we have, and what sort of tools do we have that we can deal with some of those things. Since we did the original master plan in 1998, I think probably one of the biggest things that has changed historic-wise is the demolition delay bylaw, which doesn't prevent anyone from tearing something down, but starts a conversation about that resource, and is it important, and should you look at those sort of things. So I'll sort of turn it over to the work that the Historic Commission is doing right now, and sort of what sort of things have you guys been delving into. Some of the things we've already touched on, but where are we at with our historic resources in town, would you say, Fran?
I think I'd like to just start off with the fact that Kingston is very rich in historical resources. One of the things you didn't mention that I do is I'm also I'm a trustee for the Adams Center, which the town invested a lot of money and time through the CPC on renovations to that building, and it's now turned into a gorgeous event space that the town can use, and hopefully will become an archives for historic artifacts and things that we have. But the town is really rich with a lot of resources. Right in the little center of town, we've got the Font School, as you mentioned, the old townhouse, which is being renovated as we speak. The Adams Center, the number of the churches along Main Street. Main Street itself is rich in historic homes. So, and you have the Bradford House, and then down the Jones River watershed down along there, those buildings along the river. So Kingston has a lot of really rich beautiful resources that I think if people just get out and walk and go and see, they'd be amazed at what is there. And the Historical Commission is really committed to trying to preserve these things. And Christian can probably address the fact that it's a hard thing to do when you have people who want to renovate a home, and again, we're responsible for what's outside, what you can see on the outside. But if somebody wants to do demolition, we've had a lot of people come to us through the demolition delay bylaw, which was put into effect, I'm trying to think now how many years ago, I think maybe
It's maybe 10 years.
yeah,
or
about
so.
10 years now, I believe, since we had that. And sometimes within the commission itself, we struggle with it because people are coming, it's their property, they want to do things, but you want to really do everything you can to preserve the history of the town. So I'm glad we have that bylaw. I don't know if you want to.
Sure, that the bylaw is helpful. It may not necessarily have tons of teeth to it because all it can do is essentially delay ultimately what the homeowner wants to do with their property by about 6 months or so. But as you alluded to, it opens up a conversation. And there was a property that came up recently for that, and it was a bit of an involved process. It involved our suggestions about what maybe could be done design-wise, and it got into deeper conversations about this particular property and its role in the neighborhood that it was in, and as Fran said, these are people's homes, and they obviously have a right, and I support the right to be able to do what you want to with your home, but also by starting that conversation, it moves that conversation beyond, hey, this is what I want to do with my residence, into, gosh, maybe I didn't really look at my home quite in that way, and maybe I'd see it more as a resource now. But short of actually having a historic district commission, which can really lay down the law and have cease and desist permits and whatnot, it's hands are a little bit tied from going in too deep. But as far as the historic commission in general, and Fran's absolutely right, we have lots of resources in this town, both just in tangible historical resources from colonization, but then further back, Native American concerns, the Hall property. And I think there's a large opportunity coming up with the 2020 celebration, which I might be asking you about later in the interview, but that there's a big opportunity there, I think, to celebrate what we have on a larger stage. And because there's going to be, I don't recall the statistics, but it's something like 3 times the amount of visitors we get to this region are going to come through in that 2 or 3 year period around
They're projecting
2020.
7 million something.
Right.
Is that what it is? 7 million? Yeah, I
million.
knew it was some hard to wrap your mind around numbers. How can there possibly be that many? I actually live right on 3A, and I'm thinking about quitting my job at Colonial Saw. Now that it's out there, and starting a lemonade
Put
stand.
out a lemonade
yeah,
stand
because I
right
won't
there.
be able to leave my driveway, I'm guessing, if we're still there. So anyway, this and incorporating historical trails that are certainly going to be part of the Plymouth 400 celebration, rolling that into Kingston, which of course was Plymouth early on. So.
And when I drive around Kingston or walk around Kingston, it's really funny because I think to myself, boy, people have been here, for thousands of years. I was starting with the Native Americans first in that whole area. We've got the Hall property, the Hall, what they call the old Hall swamp site, but then there are other properties in town where they definitely have evidence of Native American, villages, homes. They found, artifacts there, and and just the colonial, during the colonial time. So Plymouth certainly has a very rich history, but so does Kingston. So it will be exciting once the 2020, we really want to get in on the ground floor of that whole 2020 celebration to also be able to celebrate the resources within Kingston. But I want to go back a little bit to the demolition delay bylaw because about 10 years ago when we put this into effect, prior to that, people could just go in and just there was a beautiful old historic house right on Main Street that just boom, one day it's there and the next day it's gone. And I think that was the thing that made people say, wow, we've got to do something to not have this happen again, because it really was overnight where this beautiful old home was just leveled. And so the bylaw has been very good to, as Chris said, start that conversation and get people really talking about, can you save this property? What could this property become? There was a case where the Kennedy Donovan School is now, there was an old home there, and that they really made an effort to try to find someone to take the old home and move it.
They're actually doing the numbers to figure out how to move it.
Right, doing the numbers to figure out how to move it, that sort of thing. It didn't stop the progress of the Kennedy Donovan Center, but it got people talking about that property and what went on in that house beforehand. One of, I think, a real plus in this column has been what's been going on at the Old Townhouse. The renovation of that house is just lovely. It took a while to get it started, but the gentleman who owns it is doing a beautiful job. And it's really funny because now you look on Facebook and people are putting comments on Facebook like, who's doing that to the Old Townhouse? It's gorgeous, you know, it's really pretty. And that all came about through numerous conversations with the Historical Commission and the fact that a demolition delay bylaw was in place, so that and also preservation restrictions were in place on the property. So the person who bought it knew that these are things he had to do at some point in time, and he's doing it, and it's really lovely. And so that will become another lovely spot in the center of town once he's through with it. So the Historical Commission serves a great purpose with that, I think.
And improves communication with the building inspector
Right.
as well
Right.
in what's going on, because
Right.
you don't know, and because of the demolition delay bylaw, when someone comes in for a
Right.
demolition permit, if a house is a certain error, then he refers that to you.
Right,
folks.
and we're very fortunate because our building inspector is very good about that, and he contacts our chairman right away, and then everything starts the wheels moving. So that's good. But also, Christian mentioned local historic districts. One other thing that has started now in Kingston is there's a local historic district study committee. It started a long time ago, but it just kind of fell apart through time. But now they've
Had a reboot.
They've had a reboot. They're re-energized, and they're looking at. They've looked at. Originally, they were thinking of a larger section of the community to be a historic district, but now they've really narrowed it down to a smaller section that involves the Main Street down to a certain point on Summer Street and right down to the river. But that section of town that really contains a lot of those historic resources. So they're working now. They've done a survey. They sent a survey out to everybody who lives in that proposed district and had really a nice response back from the surveys. And overwhelmingly, most people are very much in favor of it. And the people who have questions, the purpose of the committee, this particular committee, is to meet with everybody and answer those questions and design a bylaw that everybody is comfortable with, that will serve the purpose of historic preservation, but also that people can live with, that that they can function, and as Chris said before, it's their home. So we're excited about that.
Because the idea is you bought a house in this neighborhood, presumably because you liked old houses.
Right.
And if you like an old house, wouldn't it be great to have an old house next to you versus someone who gets to come in and just demo something and
Right.
put up some Miami Vice stucco monstrosity? No offense to the folks in Miami who are watching the show. But that's the whole
Sure.
idea is the protection of the resources protects all of those people's interests and all those
Right.
people's investments.
Right,
in
so it's
their
not just your own interest, but knowing that you're in a network of people that share the same thing, and they're going to be so inclined to tear it down.
And
build
in the
something that doesn't
conversations
fit.
we have had preliminarily with the local historic district study committee, is this won't be an issue of what color you can paint things.
Right, no.
It's about what you see from the street,
Right.
what you want to do inside the house is just fine. This is making the streetscape look like the streetscape that you moved into, and preserving that scenic vista, that character of your neighborhood. It takes a town meeting vote. It's quite a process.
Right, it is
So-
quite a process. And it's funny when you talk about that, because I think about the Adams Center. One of the things when they did the renovations, they had to make the Adams Center handicapped accessible. So there was this whole question about, well, how do we do that and still preserve the unique historic look of this building? So there's now a glass addition, which after a while you think, well, you're really focusing on the Adams Center and not on the glass addition, but that glass addition serves a valuable role because it holds the whole handicapped accessibility aspect of the building. And But there was a lot of talk about that at the beginning. Oh, is it just going to stick out? Is it going to be kind of funny? Is it really, correct to put that on this building? But I think they did a nice job with it because it still preserves the historic aspect of the building and in a nice way. And you can see right through the glass, almost down to the water. So.
And quite frankly, I can't believe I didn't reference that you were an Adams trustee and the chairman, because I'm familiar with the Adams building.
Right, you very.
I was in that. My office was in there for a number of years, and we had a meeting just yesterday with the archaeologist, one of the archaeologists from PAL, and PAL stands for Public Archaeology Lab. The folks who did the dig at the Hall Swamp property, because we're looking at the archival storage area in the Adams, built specifically for this purpose, to house some of those things that we have that are historic resources and artifacts for the town. Some of the findings from the Hall property. There are 32 boxes of stuff. Stuff is the technical term that I use for the stuff.
Artifacts.
And in addition to that, when we were originally doing the sewer project, there was a dig across the Tura property, and they found artifacts from the contact period, when the Native Americans and the Pilgrims first met and exchanged contact. That's the concept of that. So some of those artifacts could conceivably come back to the town as well.
Right. I don't think people realize it, but Kingston has artifacts all over the state. There are some in Boston at the Massachusetts Historical Commission, the archives there. There are some at Plymouth Plantation. There are some at BU. There are some at the Public Archaeology Laboratories, because Kingston had no place to house these things, and you have to really have it has to all be certified by the state.
Yeah, we talked about the custodial permit yesterday,
right.
Which is one of those things we'll be looking into.
Right. So.
And and we made history, frankly, in Kingston with the discovery of the Hall Swamp site. This was an area, and typically wetland areas are areas where the indigenous people would have lived at, because there's a water source there. It's protected from the elements. And so where we see wetlands and things like that, you typically find archaeological sites from ancient people. And these go back 10,000 years. An amazing find, but one that we're very cautious about and very protective of, because there are people who would want to come get stuff from there.
Right.
It is an amazing site, and so many people in the archaeology business and the history business are just ecstatic. Really ecstatic about what a tremendous thing this is. We talked about some of the soils and things like it was really quite a conversation. Just talking about the site, our room that we might house these things in, about the whole dig and that process.
Right.
So, and I imagine that has been quite an odyssey for you guys as well.
Oh, for sure. That's been a. It's been at times a political football, but in the discoveries that were found recently that kind of put a stop to everything. It kind of, beyond what you were saying, you'll find these artifacts that are, I guess you'd call it eons, or thousands of years old. That in itself is hard to wrap your mind around, but then the recent discovery, there's a burial area too, lends an aura of sanctity, to it. That it's a really special place. The Native American communities, the Aquinnah, they say this is a really special place. This goes back to our core values. It'd be interesting to see whether they are able to somehow use the area or somehow make that part of their cultural catalog. But yeah, it's an amazing resource, and especially when you throw numbers out there that's like, the finds are at 8,000 years old. I mean, that predates the pyramids by 3,000 years.
And we only looked at about, maybe 1% of the site.
Tiny part of the site.
And that's all they'll, I don't think there's going to be any digging whatsoever.
Well,
at that point.
Once they found, the remains, that sort of put a stop to everything. But you didn't need to go any further, because you really knew this was at one time probably a very vibrant village, or there might have been some people being very nomadic, coming in and out of it. But it definitely was a place where the Native Americans called home, and this is where they lived, this is where they hunted, this is where they fished, and this is where they died and celebrated their dead. So it's hands off.
It's a sacred site.
Yeah, it's a sacred site.
From the archaeologist perspective, it's like almost like a watershed moment.
Right.
I mean, it's almost become legendary. So, I mean, I don't have any familiarity with the archaeological world, but Aaron and the folks from PAL said that it's almost like they're sort of, I'm not celebrity status, but everyone else is in the archaeological community is pretty envious of them that they were the ones that got to do it, because it's almost unprecedented. The amount of
typically with a site, particularly in New England, it would have been farmed, so people would have tilled the soil.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is a site, because it's in the wetlands, because it's in the woods, was never plowed.
Right.
The layers of soil are perfectly stratified. And when you talk about finding the remains of someone buried 10,000 years ago, that's differences in the organic compounds in the soil. Where they dig in and go, this is where people were. You don't find much of a person there after 8,000 or 10,000 years.
Well, this site in particular, my first year as moderator, I think it was my first or my second year, they were looking to start the ball field project in the Hall Swamp, what they called the Hall Swamp. And they were going, and that's why this is so rich, is because it was swampland and nobody went down there or did anything. And I'll never forget at one of the town meetings when they were talking about it, a gentleman who was lived in the town for all of his lifetime.
Benny McFarland, I think it was. I love
Benny
that quote from
McFarland.
Benny McFarland. I won't say it, but it was a great quote.
You know, he came down, well, I'll say it because it was really funny. And he came down to the podium and he said, "You can't build anything down there because a water commissioner went in there and he never came out." Everybody was like laughing. But it turns out he was sort of right, because he knew that there was a lot that was down there that just should be left alone. And when they did that first ball field project, they found some artifacts, so they knew if they were going to continue the project, then they would have to have the archaeologists come in and do a more defined dig, which is what happened, and that's why that's what happened, that they found so much more, so it just stopped the expansion of the ball fields. And now they found another site for them, which is good, and as Chris said, it sort of became this political football. I mean, who knew that being on the Historical Commission, you'd be involved in, you know, a lot of controversy and political stuff.
Yeah.
I thought it would be a nice and quiet volunteer
Yeah,
opportunity.
talking about old houses and
right.
monuments and stuff.
Let's just talk about history.
Yeah.
But
well, it is an amazing site, and very nice that we had in mind with the Adams building and the archival storage area that we built. It's it really is a state-of-the-art room. It's got a vapor barrier in the floor, ceiling, and walls. It's temperature controlled, humidity controlled. It's exactly what the place that you would keep things like this.
Right.
We've installed security, we've got alarms, we've got closed circuit TV in there, and now we're just moving along with some systems for how you catalog and things. Like accession systems is something I learned yesterday.
Right. Well, the good thing is, when you're doing something like this, you need to plan out what it is you want this building to be used for. And there was a lot of good planning that went into place as they were renovating that building and preparing to renovate that building. And I know you were involved in that, and I know there was a whole committee involved in that. And I really applaud them for you and them for having the foresight to see that maybe at some point in time, Kingston would need something like this. Because that could have just become a meeting room or something else, but instead the thought was, let's make it an archival space. And it was really smart, because now who knew that, you know, 5 years after the renovation was done, you were going to find what was found at the Hall site. So, but along with everything else that Kingston has that's scattered all over the state, it would be nice to bring some of it home.
So we've got some new things to add to the master plan as we move forward, with resources lost and resources found, strategies and things moving forward, a discussion about local historic districts, and tourism, historic tourism, which I think really hasn't really been talked about a whole lot. It's a historic component, it's an economic development component, and there are a lot of places that that would benefit from that.
Right.
We talked about in the economic development show about how the top employers in 1998 included the Independence Mall, R.S. Means, and Victory Supermarket. Some of those aren't there anymore. Some have substantially changed.
Right.
And so you can look at where do we go in the future with having some economic development opportunities, and cultural tourism is one of those things. And those people typically are you know, they're sort of glasses wearing, nicely cropped world travelers. Anyone who knows about fractured prunes certainly is a world traveler. So there's a lot that we sort of take for granted for our historic research, but a whole lot more to it. And we hope to develop more of that with the master plan. And we're always on the master plan looking for additional public input from people as we move forward in the process.
Well, I loved the proposed drawings of, what that little downtown section would look like, and because Kingston is a lovely, colonial town. It really is, and we've got one street that looks like that, and then we have another street that's, very businessy. So it'll be nice as the master plan moves forward that they take that historical piece into account and try to make everything look, very historic.
So once again, for our viewing audience, if you've got ideas for the master plan, whether for historic preservation or otherwise, you can email me, tbott@kingstonmass.org. Stop by the office. Things in print are good, whether they're written on a cocktail napkin or an email. If I've got them in print, I know exactly what's on your mind. And of course, all of our master plan meetings are posted and they're open. We'll have some additional public venues, but we're always looking for input for the master plan, always looking for your ideas, whether it's for housing, economic development, transportation, whatever the case may be. And we hope to hear from you and hope that our historic resources are preserved under the watchful eye of you folks and perhaps a local historic study committee at some point in the future. I thank you guys for coming. Have you got any closing words for our folks on?
I've heard some folks say that this master plan is going to be a pretty important one because it may in some way or other be the last one that really matters, that basically whatever land is preserved at this point is going to always stay preserved, and whatever is left for development, same thing applies, so that whatever is laid out now will largely shape the architecture of the plan moving forward. So it's it's a lot of talk, and there's not a whole lot of like any sort of legislation that will come out of it, but it's the community's input and opinion on what their town should look like moving forward, right now or moving forward, is pretty important.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for
Chris,
asking
thanks
us.
for coming.
You're welcome.
And enjoy.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
We will.